Welcome to the Galloway Show. No more mom and pop television. No more no budget television. This is coming to you in high quality. I hope not too high because it might crash the whole system. Listen in for the nuggets. It's only 3 weeks until the relaunch of the midweek mother of all talk shows. This was always just a no budget television stand-in. But we're now using the budget that you have been providing. Young man in Liverpool called Mark Holt donated £500. Can you believe it? To the Fighting Fund to relaunch the midweek moats. Because when we send it up like a rocket on the 12th of October, we don't want it falling back to Earth like a burnt stick. We want it to go into orbit like a Sputnik. So, first bit of housekeeping, you can donate now on YouTube on the super chat mechanism. It's very easy. You give a quote, you give a comment if you want, you can ask a question if you want, make a donation, however large or small. The more we can raise, the better the midweek moats will be and the longer it will stay in orbit. This proves, of course, the need for a midweek show. Last week's show reached an audience of 700,000 people. Just me and Gayatri in my back bedroom with one camera and not all that great sound. If we get back on the 12th of October to a proper, all singing, all dancing, midweek mother of all talk shows, there's no reason why we can't be reaching 2 million people per week. 1 million on Sundays and 1 million on Wednesdays. Wouldn't that be nice? Now, the word Ukraine is trending on social media. Not because Scotland just beat them 3-0 at the football. So sad, too bad, never mind. But because President Putin made a speech, an interview, a televised address last evening, which changed everything. The Russians have decided to take the gloves off, and an iron fist is revealed under those gloves. In fact, 2 iron fists, because Russia has concluded it will need 2 hands to throttle the NATO alliance, which is effectively now threatening the sovereignty and the integrity and the territory of the Russian Federation. Now that NATO has given the Zelensky regime in Kiev long-range missiles that can reach well into Russia, that was a game changer for the Russians. It's no longer a special military operation conducted on somebody else's territory. In a few days' time, it will be a war between Russian territory and the NATO alliance led by the United States, but with a collection of satrapies who are to a lesser or greater extent now fully engaged in the war. Some of them are, militarily speaking, a joke. The Netherlands army, anyone? Portuguese army? These are minor satrapies. But the British armed forces and the Americans are carrying most of the burden of the decision that was made long ago in 2014 to use the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder in an attempt to build a front, a ramp over which they could threaten Russia, weaken it, break it up, balkanize it, if possible, destroy the regime there. They loved the regime in Russia when it was lying drunk on the floor and Western countries and companies were picking its pockets. But now that it's got a leader who has restored Russia's strength, its dignity, and its standing in the world, they don't like it one bit. So they redoubled their efforts in 2014 with the military coup in Kiev. A coup, a violent one that set the parliament on fire, set the elected president running for his life, forced deputies at gunpoint to sign laws outlawing the Russian language, all the things you've heard me talk about so many times before. But Putin's speech last evening changed everything. Because in a few days' time, the areas liberated from the Zelensky regime will hold referendums. And in those referendums, it's likely they will overwhelmingly decide to join the Russian Federation, Novorus, New Russia. It's not guaranteed, and there will be votes against, but all of the polling and all of the anecdotal evidence that one can see would suggest that, like in Crimea, people will vote in overwhelming numbers to escape the Kiev regime and rejoin Russia, because, of course, these are overwhelmingly Russian people who were quite content to live in Ukraine when it was part of one country, the USSR. They were even quite content to live in Ukraine when it had a president who was dedicated, at least on the face of it, to neutrality, not as a cat's paw or a spear to be used in the side of Russia. But once in 2014, the game became so clear that the Ukraine was just a pawn in the United States game. That's when they decided for them the game was up. Now, how does that change things? Well, once these territories, if they do, decide by referendum to join Russia, that means that is Russian territory. That means no more relying on local militia. Most of the dying in this war on the Russian side of things has been done by local Ukrainian people from the Donbass, organized in people's militias with all the elan and enthusiasm of volunteers, but with little of the training and military background that the Russian armed forces have. There's only ever been 140,000 Russian soldiers in this war, which began on February 25 of this year. I remember the day well because it's when I started my low carbs diet, and I'm now half the man I used to be. I'm hoping the war is over soon so I can eat a slice of bread again. The date is fixed in my mind. 25 February is when the Russian forces entered eastern Ukraine. The rest have been these popular militiamen. Well, now Russia is going to send 300,000 of its own professional soldiers from the reserve army of 1.5 million. So anything like the full strength of the Russian military, but a good deal more, double or nearly triple the amount that is there now. And with all the military paraphernalia, all the weapons systems, giving themselves military depth in the areas that they control, and seeking to liberate those remaining parts of the Donbass that are still in the hands of the Kiev regime. And that's why Ukraine is trending, because this now poses a challenge to NATO. Are they going to step up or step back? That's the question I asked in the poll. We'll get the results of that towards the end of the show. Is NATO going to take this dedicated statement by Putin last night that this is not a bluff, that Russia will fulfill its war aims, come what may, whatever the cost, and by any means necessary? Emphasis on the word any means necessary. The statement by Putin was not vainglorious. It was not fanatic in any way. It was not exultant in any way. It was calm and steady, but it's got everyone's nerves jangling in Brussels at the NATO headquarters, and no doubt in the Pentagon and in the Ministry of Defense in Britain. It's definitely got the nerves jangling in those European countries who are facing economic and political collapse already as a result of the economic warfare they launched against Russia. Will they be asked to intensify that economic warfare by Washington? And if they are asked, are they in a position to comply? Not that there's much fat left to trim, There's already virtually no economic traffic between Russia and the European Union, but that which there is still vitally important, particularly in the supply of energy. Will they be asked now by Washington to end consumption of Russian oil and gas? What about fertilizers? What about precious metals? What about food and other ingredients that are vital to the economic and social well-being of Europe? Because if they are asked and if they comply, will they follow the same fate as Draghi in Italy, as the Bulgarian government? Will they lose their majorities like President Macron did? Will they lose their seats in power like Boris Johnson did? Will they face wipeout as Joe Biden is in November in the midterm elections? These democratic tests will have to be passed by governments that decide to comply with the demand to intensify the war, economic and maybe military, against Russia. We'll see. I know where I stand, and you know where I stand. But Russia has been fighting this war, as I said, with one hand tied behind its back. Let's take the destruction of electricity power plants. Do you know how long it took us to destroy Iraq's electricity, power, sewage, water plants? In the first Iraq war, never mind the second one, it took us moments. In the first one, it took us 6 hours. Within 6 hours in 1990, we destroyed all of Iraq's vital civilian infrastructure, leaving them with dirty water, no sewage, and no electricity. 6 hours. It took Russia 6 months to decide to do that in Ukraine. And they paid with thousands of their soldiers' lives. The Russian losses were published this week. There were 6,950 Russian servicemen killed in the 6 months of this war. That, of course, is a mere fraction of the servicemen killed in the Ukrainian armed forces, which number 61,000 dead. 61,000 dead men, leaving widows and children and grieving mothers, and destroyed towns and villages, the flower of whose manhood has been lost in a war that never had to be fought. I recap for new viewers: this war never needed to be fought. If the Kiev regime had implemented the Minsk II agreements, if Germany and France, who guaranteed that agreement, put their name and their signature on that agreement, if they had forced Zelensky to implement that which they had guaranteed, this war would never have happened. And all of these people, the 6,000 dead Russian soldiers and the 61,000 nearly dead Ukrainian soldiers, would still be with their families, would still be alive and well. Of course, these people's militias in the Lugansk and Donetsk battalions have also lost thousands of people. I'm talking only of the Russian armed forces losses when I say they have lost 6,000 people. But it's 6,000 too many. 61,000 dead Ukrainians is 61,000 too many. Let no one caricature my position. I didn't want this war. I opposed the war in Ukraine from the first day in 2014 when it began. The problem is the hypocrites pretended to you that it wasn't happening. All the while, they were supplying it and egging it on. Their officers were there. Their training camps were there. They were bringing officers and men from the Ukrainian armed forces to Britain, to Germany, to NATO countries everywhere, and training them for the war, which began in 2014. So when people say to me, Why are you supporting the war? I say it's you that has been supporting the war. I'm one of a very few people, and you can consult the record on this, who cried out against that war right from the beginning. I see reports of large movements of Ukrainian armed forces and armor moving towards here or moving towards there in this much trumpeted counter-offensive. If Russia wanted to, it could destroy every last moving person and thing in that convoy, but they don't. We carpet bombed Iraq, not just in 1990, but again in 2003. Now back to these referendums. With absolutely no understanding of the word irony, Washington said today that it would not recognize the results of these referendums, because to do so would be an offense against the national sovereignty of Ukraine. That you cannot have one part of a country decide to leave the state it's in and join another state or become an independent state. Did you hear them laughing in Belgrade about that? Did you hear the people of Serbia say, wait, what? Because we sliced a part of Serbia through a bogus referendum and immediately recognized something called Kosovo as an independent state. And Russia warned at the time that you are making a legal precedent that you might come later to regret. But of course they don't regret it, because most of them have forgotten that they did it. And they have a media that can be relied upon not to remind you that they did it. They have a political class with the memory of a hen. Most of them have literally forgotten that they did that Kosovo was legally a part of Serbia. And they, by force of arms, took it from Serbia. And now Kosovo is suffering the punishment of being a participant in the Eurovision Song Contest. It's in the football tournaments. It's in the athletics, in all these sporting games. It's recognized by their part of the so-called international community as a sovereign and independent state. People appoint ambassadors to it. So wait, what? The people of Donetsk and Lugansk cannot have a referendum and decide they no longer want to live in the state they're in, but the people of Kosovo can? And what do you want to talk to me about national sovereignty? The United States is currently occupying 1/3 of Syria and stealing the oil from that 1/3. It's just a pure coincidence that the 1/3 the United States illegally occupies is the 1/3 that produces oil. As Donald Rumsfeld once said, it's not our fault that God put America's oil under other people's countries. Well, that's exactly what's happening now in Syria. What about the national sovereignty of Syria? The United States and the United Kingdom and France and other NATO members invaded and destroyed Libya without any legal United Nations permission or endorsement. They killed the leader of Libya and replaced them with 5 different leaders, all at the same time. You want to talk about national sovereignty of Libya? You want to talk about the national sovereignty of Iraq? Again, Britain and the United States invaded and occupied Iraq without a scintilla of justification. without any agreement of the United Nations. Kofi Annan describing it as an illegal invasion. I could go on, but time's against me. I could go on about all the countries that the United States and its junior partner, the United Kingdom, have massacred the national sovereignty of country after country after country. I promise you, go on all night just listing them. I've got a list of the 51 countries invaded by the United States since the end of the Second World War. And as for the British, do you know that when Her Majesty the Queen came to the throne, 25% of the population of the world was living under British rule in the 1950s? Do you know that every 6 days a country celebrates its independence from Britain? What about their national sovereignty? How did they have to declare their independence from Britain? Because we seized their countries and looted them for as long as we were able. These hypocrites with their so-called rules-based order, which actually is them making up the rules as they go along and ordering other people to comply with them. They say they won't recognize these referendums. Well, tough luck. Nobody gives a toss about your recognition any longer. The world has changed. It has changed decisively. The East is rising. The West is sinking. And rather than thinking about how we can get alongside the rising sun and get some of the warmth and goodness from it, we, like a latter-day King Canute, are ordering it to fall from the sky. Canute could not turn back the waves. As a matter of fact, he gets a raw deal in history because he knew that he couldn't turn back the waves. He was doing it to show those who thought he could turn back the waves that he could not. Our leaders, Joe Biden in particular, who doesn't know where he is most of the time, wandering around the corridors of the White House in his soiled pajamas, he thinks he can order the sun to fall. He made a statement today saying that the United States has no conflict with China and doesn't want a Cold War with China. As someone pointed out on Twitter, why make statements that every sentient being in the world know to be false? Do you want to add the charge of the rankest hypocrisy to all the other charges? Everybody knows your beef with China. Everybody knows you're striving might and main to find ways to weaken and slow the rise of China and in its alliance with Russia, in this new Eurasian bloc, in the BRICS, in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which more and more of the population of the world is joining. We see new economic, political, and yes, military developments that show decisively that actually the war in Iraq in 2003 was not the high point of the rising hegemony of the United States. It actually marked the beginning of the end of that hegemony, when the youths with their Kalashnikovs chased the American army off Haifa Street in Baghdad, sent them slinking away with their tail between their legs. That was the beginning of the end. And to quote Robert Browning, it will never be glad, confident morning again. Our leaders, singularly unfit to govern us in these turbulent times, when we face economic meltdown, currency meltdown. The pound is at its lowest level today for 37 years. Both the pound and the euro are crashing. The ruble that we were supposed to be destroying into rubble is rising and rising and is the strongest performing currency in the world this year. Imagine. Those who thought that by sanctioning Russia they would bring it to its knees are themselves now sinking to their knees. Whilst Russia and China and India and Brazil and South Africa and Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is joining the SCO, which is joining the BRICS, all these countries, half the wealth of the world is in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and nobody in the West even knows what it is. Half the wealth in the world, half the population of the world is in an organization, a club that nobody in Britain even knows exists, because we have a media in lockstep with a geriatric, sclerotic, idiotic political leadership, which has led us to the edge of the cliff. So what happens now in the Ukraine? Well, I don't know if it's too late for a negotiated settlement. I suspect that it is. Russia has come so far, to quote Shakespeare, having waded so deep. Is it easier to go forward or to go back? I don't think now that Russia would be interested in any kind of negotiated settlement that did not involve the freedom to secede of the Russian areas of Ukraine, the replacement of the Zelensky coup regime with a national leadership committed to neutrality and absolutely copper-bottom determined never to join NATO or any military bloc. I don't know if even that would bring this war to an end. Erdogan, the Turkish leader, said just 2 days ago, before Putin's speech, that Putin had told him Russia was determined to bring this war in Ukraine to a swift end. And so now that the gloves are off, now that both hands are being used, I expect the military reverses of the Ukrainian armed forces to be swift and terrible. I don't know, I hope not, that they intend to go all the way to Kiev. I hope not, but I couldn't rule it out. I'm certain that everywhere east of the river Dnieper will be a part of Novorus, leaving Western Ukraine a rump dependency, actually almost identical to Kosovo, which is a NATO dependency, which lives on your taxes and is capable of standing only because your soldiers are there. Western Ukraine will be the new Kosovo, and it will be carried on your back along with all the other burdens that you have for the rest of time. I've spoken long enough. I hope you stayed with me and there wasn't too much juice that stopped you from seeing or hearing me in quality, as we television people say. I hope you found that introduction worthwhile. Dan says the neocons control Western foreign policy and they have no reverse gear. They cannot accept defeat because their project would be over. Fair point, Dan, but how are they going to face their people? That's the question. Now, the opposition of their people is incoherent. It's not about the foreign policy, but it is about the consequences of the foreign policy, the rampant inflation, the energy shortages, the shortage of fertilizer, and soon the shortage of food, the price of petrol and diesel at the pump, there's widespread anger at our rulers over these things, even if they don't directly link it to the neocon foreign policy disaster. Let's see, Russia only doing now in relation to a referendum in eastern Ukraine what NATO did in relation to Kosovo in 2008. The West set a bad precedent. I'm not for the breakup of any country. Hypocrites, says Michael Kelleher. The amazing thing, Michael, is that when I talk to people, as you just have in that message, they don't know what I'm talking about. They don't know that we created something called Kosovo out of Serbia, having destroyed Yugoslavia in the first place. We then destroyed Serbia. We bombed it. For 60 days, we bombed it. We killed the tea ladies in the Belgrade television station, the makeup girls. Nobody remembers it. It happened in ancient times. Yeah? In the 16th century or something. Let's see what else we've got on Any Sundry Mule. What a great name. How to make a referendum totally legit in Western eyes. Hold it in the Falkland Islands, or Gibraltar, or Northern Ireland, or Kosovo. Very good. Excellent. Very droll. Bok Yanduma gives €2, as he does every week. Half the man means twice as effective. That's right. When you've got 5 young children to feed, you've got to be lean because they're hungry. Frankie says the Americans are systematically, bit by bit, pushing Putin into a situation where he's got to respond and then calling him a war criminal. I hope they decide to have talks with Putin. Still time. I'm not sure that the Russians are interested now in talks, Frankie. I think they want to end this war quickly and decisively and then talk from a position of strength. Russia will never again turn back towards the West. That show is over. Russia is now completely committed to a Eurasian future. And it seems that that's a very wise decision on their part. Learn Chinese, learn Russian, get your children to Chinese school like mine. Alistair Mackenzie says, rumors of Chinese soldiers entering Ukraine. I very much doubt that, but I did see the return of huge numbers of remains of martyrs finally being returned to China from the south of Korea in the last 7 days. 1 million Chinese volunteers fought and died in the war in Korea, which ended just before I was born. Therefore, ancient history. Lucas Valadares gives RS5. Is that Russian rubles? I don't know what it is, but thanks for it anyway, Lucas. Oh, no, it's from Brazil. I beg your pardon, Lucas. Congratulations from Brazil, George. Love your show. Let us hope Lula's comeback brings another credible voice of reason to the international show. Indeed, viva Lula, to whom I lent $200 in 1985. I want no interest, but I do want to see President Lula in power. Let's see. Peter Baldwin says the masses in continental Europe will demand their governments apply to join the BRICS countries before anything worse happens. I hope so, Peter, but not all of the people in Western countries are quite as savvy as thee and me. But I think eventually that will happen. It's a sensible thing, right? I don't want to be China. I don't want to be Chinese. I want to be British on good terms with the Chinese. Capiche? It's not rocket science. It makes sense. It's in our interest. Keyword being our. Thanks, Peter. Christine Peach says, I think India and China spoke with Putin to say, get this over with and take what you need in Ukraine as soon as possible. Shock and awe them, Russia. Well, of course, Russia has left civilian areas entirely alone in this war. Again, I make the comparison with us in the Iraq wars, especially the 2003 war, where we are responsible for the deaths of more than 1 million people in Iraq, almost all of them civilians, and more than half of them women and children. That was shock and awe. What Russia has done in this last 6 months is fight with one hand tied behind its back. Let's see what else we've got. Albert Roundtree says, please, George, can you remind everyone about the Assange demonstration in London at the Parliament on Saturday, the 8th of October. This is a Hands Around Parliament demonstration at midday, 1 o'clock, 12, 1, be there for 12. Get linking arms and surround the British Parliament, because the hour is late to save the life of the world historic journalist and publisher and political prisoner, Julian Assange, who's held not by the Chinese, not by the Russians, but by us. Let's see. Angela O'Mara says, wait until they knock out the satellites. NATO will be fighting blind with their tech equipment. Go Russia, says Angela. Amazing, we never hear any such voices on the Western media, Angela. Only here on my shows can people like you and me speak and listen to each other. Just think about that. Waba Cohen says, Washington says the exact opposite about Iranian Baluchistan. They demand a referendum for that region. Good point. I mean, I'd forgotten that one, but of course, it's true that they want referendums and the right to secede where it suits them. They didn't want to give the people in Barcelona, in Catalonia, the right to secede. They supported the Spanish state, bludgeoning those that were demanding that. But they did exactly that in Kosovo. And now they're refusing exactly what they opposed in Baluchistan. Let's hear from more of you. I don't know how long I've got, but I'm going to keep going. Blunts and Otters, what a great name. $4.99, thank you very much. The US flag has been flown at half-mast all month long, not for the victims of 9/11, but for the death of Queen Elizabeth. I think the kids call that globalism. That's the real difference in the world now, I think. I was explaining that to a friend of mine in the car today. It's not really what we thought of as left and right. It's those of us who believe in sovereign, national, democratic government, and those that believe in globalized capitalism, where the market rules, and the market is rigged by a tiny handful of multi-billionaires organized in the World Economic Forum, for example, gathering at Davos, gathering in the Bilderberg group, and so on. It's between people that support their system and those that support the right of individual countries to their own territorial integrity, to their own borders and their right to protect them, their own right to choose their own way on all kinds of things, how people should live, how people shouldn't, and so on. The right to independence is what I'm talking about here. The right to take your own path and not be ordered by some supranational power acting in the interests of oligarchs. They keep talking about Russian oligarchs. What about our oligarchs? Our oligarchs knocked the Russian oligarchs into a cocked hat. They could buy and sell them without even noticing it. You feel me? Let's see. Chinese letters that I can't read. GB News, 1.3 thousand watching. George, you officially have more viewers. Thanks. I'd be worried if we didn't have more viewers than GB News. 700,000 watched the Galloway Show in the course of the last week. Between the mother of all talk shows and the Galloway Show, the audience was more than 1.5 million. Imagine that. Let's go back to the screen. Morn's Lad says Putin must envy the degree of total compliance and obedience the British media have to the British government's propaganda news machines. It's absolutely correct. They call Putin a dictator, but no dictator could have dictated the state-mandated pornography that we have had to endure for the last 10 days with no dissident voice permitted. No one allowed to say, wait a minute, who elected King Charles? Who voted for him? Not one. On any platform, in any Western media. Putin must envy that indeed. Let's see. Preta Clark says, watching from Barbados. Sad to see this coming to a reality. I want peace, but I'm backing Putin. Preta, I wish I was with you in Barbados. Oh, I'm going to Barbados. Coconut Airways. Anybody remember that? You need to be some age. Thanks, Preta. Mons Lad again says, we should start introducing Chinese and Russian languages and studies into more Western universities because that's the future. In fact, Russian and Russian authors have been turned to face the wall. Russian students refused, some told to leave. That's the madness of this. You can't read Dostoevsky in a university because he's a dead Russian that lived and died before the Soviet Union even existed, never mind Vladimir Putin. But by the grace of God, I have 6 children, and 5 of them, well, 3 of them, can actually now speak Chinese. And that includes my 2-year-old. And that's the future. We've got to face it. We've got to get with it instead of standing against it like King Canute. Centaurus says, wish I could see Gigi shouting like this at the UN. Well, after my appearance at the US Senate, I don't think the UN would take me on, do you? But I'd like to, and thanks for the compliment, most kind. CR, who says, agreed, the United Nations is dead, it's taken over by the USA. It's even in the USA, and they can decide if you're allowed in, even though you're a sovereign member. It's a farce. The United Nations is a complete and utter farce. It's been overtaken by events. You know, nature abhors a vacuum. If the United Nations create a vacuum, other fora, other organizations will fill it. Mehdi Mossavi sends £5. Thanks, Mehdi. Very much appreciated indeed. Michael Rollinson sends £5. Thank you. Love to you, my friend. Germany has declared the army will patrol the streets from October 1st. Take note of that. Democracy coming our way. Well, Germany is going to hell in a handcart. It is the worst affected of all the countries, although the patience of the Italian people finally broke, and that will be seen in the upcoming elections in Italy, as it has just been seen in the elections in Sweden, where another so-called social, so-called democratic government met a grisly end. The Spaghetti East says it's absolutely essential that I get my double dose of George Galloway. Love from Japan. Wow. Thank you so much. We've even got people watching in Japan. Don't forget that on the 12th of October, it'll be the real deal. It will be the midweek mother of all talk shows. I'll have guests. You can phone in. There'll be multiple cameras and all the paraphernalia that goes with the Sunday mother of all talk shows. And that's what we're practicing tonight. That's why I'm not in my usual back bedroom making this just with me and my good wife. I've got more hands on deck and more equipment in place. And I'm in a proper studio. I hope it shows. On Any Sundry Mule again says, Joe Bribham and Hunter Biden. That is very, very good. Very, very good. What was it that first attracted Hunter Biden to the idea of investing his hard-earned money in biolabs in Ukraine? Why does nobody talk about that? Why does nobody talk about the absolutely extraordinary coincidence that the son of the President of the United States of America invested millions of dollars in biolabs? Where? In the Ukraine, right next to Russia. If you think that's a coincidence, I've got a bridge in London I could sell you going cheap. Lozzie says, George, I'm a black South African and you give me hope. You're the only reason I believe that all people in the West are not all evil. I really hate the West. Amanla, thank you for that. If you want to see my history with your country, South Africa, go to YouTube and go to my speech at the Oxford Union, in which I talk at length about South Africa. You might be surprised to discover that I was underground in apartheid South Africa, working for the African National Congress in the freedom struggle. And it's one of my proudest achievements that I played that small part in the liberation from apartheid of South Africa. Not that there's not still a long way to go in South Africa, but it's a place very, very dear to my heart. J. Prose Rose says, Alexander the Great ordered his casket open and his bare arms dangling to show you take nothing with you when you die. The Queen had crowns with stolen jewels. The difference between greatness and crassness. I love, I think it was St. Augustine's book, in which he tells of an encounter between Alexander the Great and a pirate ship on the high seas, ordering the pirate ship to halt. Alexander demands of the pirate captain, how dare you terrorize these waters as a thief? And the bold captain replies, how dare you terrorize the whole world? Call yourself an emperor and call other men pirates or anything you please. Very profound that, yeah? Thanks for that. Marion Norton says, I always wondered how such stupidity could lead to the first two world wars. Sadly, I think that question may soon be answered. I hope not, Marion, but you certainly can't rule it out. And Putin didn't rule it out in his address last night. I'm reading Beaver's history of the civil war in Russia between late 1917 and 1920. Did you know that all of our countries, 15, I think, invaded Russia in 1918? Did you know that we sent hundreds of thousands of Western soldiers invading Russia in order to bring about regime change because we didn't like the government of Vladimir Lenin? You know, we fought there for 2 years. We left the blood and bones of many of our men there. Not a lot of people do. I'm sure you do, Marian, but not a lot of people do. Jeanette Hope says, as usual, your intro mega spectacular speech, George, should be shared on a global stage. Thanks, Jeanette. Well, thankfully, it is. This show is watched all over the world, as we've already seen from the messages tonight, from as far afield as South Africa and Japan. But thank you, a beautiful thing to say. My old friend, Scouser Lara, I was at his wedding in the height of the summer. £4.49, thanks, brother. Liz Truss pledged more billions to the Ukraine fascist-riddled regime, yet millions of our citizens will freeze this winter. It is mind-boggling. What's mind-boggling is that she gave £3 billion more to Ukraine, and nobody raised a voice about, nobody even asked a question about it in the British Parliament. Not one person said, don't we need that $3 billion for our pensioners that are having to decide whether to heat or eat? Why are you giving it away? Have we not given enough in a battle over whether Kupiansk should be in Russia or Ukraine, even though we've never heard of Kupiansk, couldn't spell it, don't know where it is on the map, but we're going to freeze and starve to determine that Kupiansk is in Ukraine and not in Russia? You see how absurd this all is? It's unbelievable. Thanks for the donation. Michael Julian says, George Galloway, George, how are you and your family? How is your mum doing? I wish you and your family members the grace of a long life, sir. It seems Anglo-Saxons worldwide can't kick imperialism. Powerfully said, Michael, but not all of us. When I came home and told my Irish grandfather that my school teacher had said that Britain had an empire so vast that on it the sun never set, my grandfather answered, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. My mother's fine, thank you very much. 78 years old, 88 years old. Forgive me, Ma, you look so young. Martin, £5. Love the show. Thanks for speaking the truth and the education, George. Thank you, Martin. And thank you for that kind donation. A Russian? A Serbian. Serbia received mass infrastructure improvements from China. Indeed so. And Russia just froze the price of the energy it supplies to Serbia this very week. And Putin said that it was Russia's duty to help its brotherly people in Serbia. And having been in Serbia, I can tell you, it's very, very highly appreciated by the people in Serbia, who are more Russian than the Russians. There's quite a few of the Russian bourgeoisie on the airplanes right now, fleeing their country for their oligarchical second homes, just in case Putin calls them up to the front line. But the vast majority of decent, patriotic Russians are fully behind their country. Let's see. Silvio Perez gives 10 Australian dollars. Thank you very much. Love you, George. Just don't tell the wife. I love you in a manly way. Each time I tell people I support Russia, they get visibly shocked. I then give them links to your show so they can get educated. How beautiful, Silvio. Thanks. I'll blow you a kiss, but don't tell the wife. Yours or mine. Ben Kavanagh gives 10 British pounds. Thank you, Ben. 10,000 Belgian trade unionists held a rally in Brussels today and called for the government to end war, sanctions, and leave NATO. When will enough is enough call for the same? What's wrong with our trade unions? Ben, I wish I had time to begin to enumerate all the things that are wrong with our unions. I think I've got a minute or two left, do I? Super Patriot says, fact, George Galloway is always 200% correct on war. Thank you kindly. for that. Let me race through as many as I can in the remaining moments. Mohammed Dasuki gives £1.79. Keep up the great work, George. And that donation is for the Moats Extra. Many, many thanks, Mohammed, to you. Truth Searcher says, George, what are the chances our journalists will feel any shame when the truth of this conflict is revealed, as it always is eventually? Zero. You know the old adage, thank God you cannot bribe or twist the average British journalist. But when you see what unbribed he'll do, you realize there's no reason to. I always loved that. Acton, I think, in the 1940s or 50s. Maybe someone can provide chapter and verse. Ali Uhuru, George, you are a great man. Watching you from Mogadishu. Wow. Thank you so much, Ali. God bless and save the people of Somalia. Peter Sheck gives 10 American dollars. Thank you, Mr. Galloway. Your take on the present status of Imran Khan. I'm not a US senator, so I actually want Pakistan to thrive. Me too. I'll probably speak about that on Sunday night on Moats. I fear for the safety and even the life of Prime Minister Imran Khan, who was wrongly usurped from office by an American regime change operation, precisely because they want Pakistan to be a plaything. A plaything. Now, breaking news, Russia and Ukraine are exchanging prisoners of war right now. And of course, the British mercenaries were rather mercifully, I must say, freed by their captors in the Donetsk and Lugansk prisons through the intermediary of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. What that's all about, I have no idea. It's convoluted, but I'm glad that at least 5 people who may well have deserved condign punishment are not now to face it. It's just a pity. A lot of other people had to leave their guts on the ground in Mariupol and other places in order to liberate them. Leslie Watts gives 10 Australian dollars. Thank you, Leslie. God bless you. Michael Sherry gives 5 British pounds. Thank you, Michael. Wonderful. Picture that. What a beard. That's what you call a beard. Fadi Cease gives 2 American dollars. In my NDE, Elizabeth met the King Jesus. Jesus is indeed the King. Giles McComish gives £5. Stockport, here we come. I'll take the highlight. I'm in Stockport on, there it is, on the 7th of November. That is almost 2 months away. Well, it's what, 6 weeks at least away. And there's only 10 tickets left in a 151-seat theatre. It's the mother of all talk shows roadshow. 10 seats left. You better get your ticket while you can. Now, here's the voting. Will NATO step up or step back? On Twitter, it's 66% step up, 34% step back. And on Telegram, 63% step up, 37% step back. And on the show, it's 61% step up, 39% step back. So looks like European war then. Fair enough. Look after your children. God bless you all. See you on Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time for the mother of all talk shows on all platforms. Thanks for watching.